So today we're talking about structuring your committee for success and the various aspects and elements that go into structuring your committee for success. First of all, let's talk about volunteering. I realize that some of you aren't volunteers, you're administrators, but primarily you're dealing with volunteers as well. Volunteering is a spark that makes our society works. It's what makes your organizations work. And it takes organizations to build the support structures that keep it going. Better structures lead to better work, and people who care can magnify their impact by building structures that bring in more people who care. The organizational structure is critical to the success of your organization. However, we know that more than 90% of our organizations struggle to attract committee members. It's a common thread through all of the organizations that talk to us. So why is that? What's the problem? Often, and I'm sure you've all heard this, when you go out and look for people, the responses are, it looks too hard, it seems stressful, I don't have the time, it's intimidating, are common responses that you might get. When we survey in this country, in Australia, the average tenure for a committee person is roughly 2 years. And the average amount of time spent per week for the average committee person is 11 hours a week. I know I was spending 40 plus hours a week on some of my committees because of the amount of work that was required, which is just not sustainable, as you know. It causes burnout. Burnout's a very real thing in community-minded organisations. That's because we make it bloody hard and long. And if anyone said, hey, do you want to join our committee? It's only going to cost you 11 hours a week. You can imagine the sort of response that we get. So what are the biggest competitors, or what are we competing against in order to attract these volunteers? What do potential volunteers think about when they're going to put their hand up or perhaps get pulled up into a committee type position? First of all, there's three elements. The first one is willingness. So are they willing in order to put their hand up? Secondly is availability. Do they have the time to put into this organization? And thirdly is capability. Are they capable of doing the job that you're asking them to do? Obviously, they're three very different things, and they all start out as dots for the most part, for most people, as to, I'm kind of willing, I want to help, but I don't think I've got enough time. You guys look like you're spending 11 hours a week. I don't have that. I don't think I'm capable of running an event or driving the membership or being the treasurer, whatever the case might be. So how do we go through and mitigate some of these issues with driving the organisation? So some key elements. First of all, a task list. So, and I'll go into detail with each of these areas. Secondly is peer support. And thirdly is a hierarchy of achievement. Without these three things, we're pushing things even further uphill, trying to get people over the line with mitigating those three issues that we just spoke about. So first of all, a task list. A list of tasks to be done is really, really important because it frees a volunteer up to know what to do next, rather than the cognitive load of just being thrown a, hey, can you set up the quiz night or run the memberships without understanding explicitly what's the breakdown of what needs to get done in order to achieve these things. A task list makes it emotionally and socially safe and gives confidence for contributing and being part of being in the committee. It also lays out the roadmap for how we get as an organisation from here to there, wherever there is, and knowing what's next rather than sort of guessing. And again, not knowing how much is to be done means that I'm going to be spending 10 hours a week doing it. Obviously, within Tidy, you can set out tasks fairly easily. You can assign tasks to an individual, their description, when they're due, a reminder a few days before they're due. You can have them repeating, and you can have people following them if you want. So very easy to write them all down. The other sort of powerful thing with tasks is that you can also assign them for roles. So the secretary here is for repeating tasks. A lot of our organizations, we know we've got a lot of sports organizations, even the non-sports organizations, they typically run to a schedule. AGM is a perfect example. Every year in October or whenever it might be, we have the AGM. Every year around this time, we have this particular event. We have these series of networking events, social events, etc. Generally speaking, if I'm buying a membership, it's because I want to be part of the events and getting around other like-minded people to do like-minded things. So broadly speaking, there's a real cadence to the sorts of things that we do each year. So the advantage here is that you can establish roles and assign them to establish tasks, rather repeating tasks, and assign them to roles, because you know that they're going to happen every single year around this time. And that makes it a lot easier if I'm going to fall into the secretary role, that I know, okay, these 10 things need to happen every single year. And it makes or allows me to prepare accordingly. By the way, if you do have questions, the chat is open, and Lauren from the team's monitoring that. She'll try and answer them as we go. Otherwise, I'll swing it back around to the chat towards the end. Peer support. Peer support's critical in most things, most endeavours in life. And it's no different, obviously, being in the committee. People like us on a committee do things like this, knowing that you're around like-minded people and you've got the support to get things done is obviously critical. It's difficult enough to find the time and energy to contribute, but harder still if you feel like an outsider and you're not sure about what you should be doing on the committee. Starting people with small tasks and building up the confidence is so important, and it's a real reason or a real sort of secret power to building up that committee. A lot of people, we'll get into it in a bit, is they create the organizational chart and with big roles, big fancy roles, and people are just too intimidated to start in those sorts of positions. A number of people that say, well, I've never been a treasurer before, I've never been a secretary, it sounds really serious. Whereas if you can groom people into the roles and start with a very small task, like, all I want you to do is record the meeting minutes, I don't need you to chair the meetings, that might be a smaller task. Breaking down, okay, we need to order new t-shirts, but breaking that task into, you know, we need to design them, we need to order them, we need to pick up t-shirts. Maybe your first job is just to pick up the t-shirts. Maybe your job is just to put them in the storeroom. Starting with a very small task and building up confidence into the organizational chart is a lot easier than making big jobs and then trying to drill down into smaller tasks for people. Peer support's also exposing and having transparency through what needs to get done around the organization. By exposing the complete list of tasks for everyone, one, you can split them all up and break them down a whole lot easier with what needs to get done. And you can also see things that are outstanding or haven't been assigned to anyone. So people can pick up things a lot easier. I know personally, I saw it with young guys that I brought onto the committee, and their first job was just to set up the marquee for my game days for playing football. That was the first job. The only job that I tasked them with all year was to set up the marquee. Then second year, or even halfway through the season, he said, well, what else can I do to give you a hand? And because we were having a transparent list of everything that was going on, he could see other jobs that were easy enough to break out and hand off to other people to get more people involved. I personally started off with a token 4 people on the committee, which seems to be relatively normal for a lot of organizations. And by the end of the year, we had 20 odd people on the committee, or on the extended committee, as I call it, helping out in lots of different ways with it all. Next, we have what I call a hierarchy of achievement. So what we want to do is amplify and encourage the work of the 10% of people who do 90% of the work. It's often a different or worse ratio than this. But what we really want to do is recognize the people that are doing these sorts of things and these jobs, and really amplifying what they're doing out into the broader membership. Maybe it is, you're obviously limited in the way that you can reward these guys. Maybe it is a reduced price membership or free tickets to the corporate lunch or things of that nature. But maybe it is just about, shouting about them in your newsletter, or stopping one of the events and recognizing the people that have helped create the event and get it up on its feet. Everyone from the smallest person all the way up to the events coordinator, making sure you're celebrating everyone along the way, because that sort of stuff is self-fueling cycle of impact that breeds more and more type of behavior. Also, you can do it in meeting minutes. So when you're having your regular committee meetings and things like that, create a section within each of the meetings, have a topic for highlights and shout outs. I know we do this internally and it works really well. One, it just stops and pauses people for a moment to think about everyone else that's helping out and give thanks to those that are, they might have helped with the memberships, or maybe they stepped up and set up the marquee. Maybe they went and picked up the t-shirts. Whatever it is, it's sort of highlighting and calling out people that have sort of stepped up to the plate and helped out, even if they're small jobs of emptying the bins or closing the club rooms early, or whatever the case might be. Making sure that we're highlighting these sorts of people throughout the course of the year is really, really critical to that success. I talk about those things first because you need to get those things right, and it forms part of this structure. It's all very well to have a structure, but unless those other things are happening, the structure is a fairly blunt instrument. Similarly, you need leadership in order for this organizational structure to work. The organizational structure is really just a management tool. Management tools are good, but non-profit organizations need leadership. Basically, they die without a level of leadership. And I won't get into the governance side of organizational structures. That's for another time, for lawyers, etc. What I'm really focused on is the organizational structure and how it can work for you guys. And for that to happen, it needs a leader or several leaders. It generally needs more than one leader, but leaders generally create a culture around the goals and involve others in that culture. They have curiosity about their world and what they're trying to change in their world. Broadly speaking, if you're here today, you've got that curiosity, and there's others in your organization that are helping with events or memberships or what have you that have that same level of curiosity. We need to obviously stoke that and make sure we're promoting it. Leaders typically, you hope, have charisma in a variety of forms. So that's not just getting up and looking good in front of a lectern. It's also in the way that they communicate, or maybe they just side up to people and thank them for their efforts. It's really in the way that they attract and motivate people to follow and get behind the cause and your mission as an organization, which leads into communicating the vision of the future. So I'll get into strategy in another webinar over the next few weeks that we've got planned. But obviously having your strategy and a vision as to what the future of the organization looks like is really, really important. And then communicating that vision to everyone else in the organization is really important. And then committing to that vision and making decisions based on that commitment is obviously second to that. And connecting followers to one another, like we've already spoken about, getting everyone on the same page for everyone to understand what's going on around the organization and what's the bigger reason that we're doing this is critical to getting people on side for it. So the organizational structure has to be simple, because we're not typically paid organizations. We're not paid administrators. Most of us on this call and most of our customers are not paid administrators. So it has to be incredibly simple, one, to create, and 2 to talk to over time. So organizational design, like I said, it's a structure that we use. It's powerful, but it's really blunt unless we have the leadership and we have the roles and we have the tasks and we have the mission, etc. around it. It's only part of the equation. We also need process to determine how the work flows. So writing down all the tasks and understanding what the process is to create the event, to process memberships, etc. That all obviously circulates around the organizational design. Hierarchy of achievement, as mentioned, we need to commend those that help. That obviously stokes the organizational structure. People practices, how do we recruit? Like I mentioned, starting the jobs small is the secret to creating better committee structures and attracting people to the committee. Don't start with the jobs at the titles of the people at the top. Start with the jobs at the bottom. And culture is an outcome of the way our organization works. So a lot of people want to talk about culture at the start, which is great, but really it's just an outcome of the way that you structure your organization and get all these things done. Alignment. So the goal is to create an organization that brings out the best in people. It makes it easy to do that work and will accomplish the bigger mission that the organization has. A big thing is trusting others to come through with their parts, is giving them the job of running the social event or looking after the meeting minutes and trusting that they're going to do their job. It's probably never going to be exactly how you would have done it. That's okay. You need to be okay with it not being perfect and letting others sort of trip and fall on the way through with it all. And similarly, there's always going to be gaps. Obviously, there's gaps between where we are now and where you're trying to get to. There's always going to be gaps because that's just the way humans are with organizations. They want to achieve more and go further. So there's always going to be gaps. And that's also okay. It means there's gaps that need to be filled. So, and finally, the leadership model. What I'm about to show you is more about the functional structure. So, like I said, lots of organizations go in with a business mindset as to how the organizational structure needs to be created. I tend to flip it upside down and say, well, what are the areas based on the expertise? So, Lauren, you're in charge of memberships, or maybe it's broken down. You're in charge of past player memberships or current player memberships, maybe social memberships or corporate memberships. Andrew, you're running events or social events or fundraising events, or merchandise or club experience. The best managers are those that are excellent individual contributors but never want to be the manager. Typically, they do it because no one else is going to do the job. Obviously, again, non-profits tend to get whoever they can, rather than having a recruitment process that can screen the best individuals to do the job. So sometimes this goes a little bit wanting. You've sort of just got to groom people into the best roles possible because you're desperate most of the time. And when you put people in, generally speaking, you want people that know what details are important. So if they're running the quiz night or the corporate lunch, they know what's important and where to focus their attention. You need to trust them that they're going to care about the way that these things are done and let them run with it. It'll build them up and take the organization forward. Collaboration wins, so trusting others around you to execute. Obviously, with everyone being able to see all the tasks that are outstanding around the organization, means that everyone can see what's going on around the place, and trusting others to execute, because we can all see what's outstanding and what needs to get done. This is perhaps a bit of a poke, but decision by committee is a horrible way to run. Dictators are pretty horrible people as well, but dictatorships definitely get things done in the community space. Obviously, there's definitely some things that need decision by committee, and I know this is probably controversial subject that'll get me in trouble, but small businesses and startup businesses, broadly speaking, if you have one person that's in charge of events and one person that's in charge of memberships, etc., and they're tasked with execution, let them run with it and have them beg for forgiveness rather than ask for permission from a committee. I know from Tidy's point of view, we see decision by committees taking 6 months because of all the debate and discussion and going in circles, and then the subcommittee turns over and they get new people that need sign off, etc., etc. Sometimes we've seen it take 18 months for people to get a decision through various subcommittees and committees. Obviously, some organisations need these sorts of organisational structures with subcommittees, etc. Subcommittees are very powerful things, and there is a place for them, to be sure. But just be careful in the way that decisions can be stymied or held up with those sorts of things. And teamwork, like a football team or anything like that, teamwork's dependent on trusting others will come through with their bits. And everyone's got their strengths. It's not just the biggest and strongest that they're not always the most powerful. That there's also smaller bits and people that show their strengths and leaderships in other ways. So you need to be kind to that. And it may not be exactly how you would have done it, but that's okay. So how organizations work, broadly speaking, you need these 5 things in place. And if you don't have these 5 things in place, you're probably going to be left wandering around and struggling to attract people into your organization for success. So we need a strategy, which, like I mentioned, we'll be talking about in future webinars, a strategy that works, that is easily called on by everyone on the committee. It's not a big business document that's very hard for people to recite or even think about or called back on over the coming years. It's something that you look to consistently, and it drives these other areas. Organisational chart, which we'll talk to next. Obviously, having a budget's really, really important, because without funding, you don't know what you're going to do and what sort of milestones we're setting for ourselves and what's achievable. Organisational chart has role descriptions. Role descriptions are driven by what we're trying to achieve and what sort of timeline we're going to achieve it in. And and moving on. So the organisational structure, typically it looks something along these lines, where we've got an advisory group or board, a president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, registrar, and a few other sort of key things. These sorts of roles are important for sure, but you sort of want to get to functions, not just departments, if that makes sense. So functional areas of the organisation. Every organisation on this call, and we've got 10,000 organisations on our platform that all have different focuses around what they do and what sort of services they're providing to their members. So you need to break that down into functions as to what's important to your members. Generally, it's member-led or customer-led, rather than what the CEO might think or president might think needs to happen. It's obviously driven by the mission and strategy, as I spoke about, and culture falls out the bottom of it with how these functions are broken down into jobs and how those jobs are then handed out and supported, which is all the things that I've spoken about earlier, with supporting each other and getting small jobs done by more and more people. The goal of this is to get more than the 4 people doing everything. Is to try and get 18 people doing lots of different things. And it may be that you don't have maybe some of these things that you outsource. Maybe it's something that you start very, very small with, where, you know, we just want you to complete 1 grant for the year. That's it. And don't overburden people with bits and pieces. Maybe the canteen bar person, all they have to do is empty the bins to start with, and the goal is to build them up into, well, now that you've emptied the bins, how about you stock the fridge? Now that you've stocked the fridge, how about you order the things for the fridge? And you slowly build them into these sorts of positions. One of the groups that we've spent a lot of time with, obviously we spend lots of times with lots of organizations. Lots of organizations can help you with structures and organizational structures. Clubmap.com.au is one of those groups. John and Terry and the rest of the people there do a good job of organizational structures. We don't get any money or anything like that from promoting these guys, but I do know they do a good job with organizational structures. If lots of local governments in Australia and New Zealand can help you with these sorts of things, they put on workshops. Many of them put on workshops and facilitate different types of organizational structure programs if you want to go down that route and really expand on this further. So in summary, breaking down all of your operations into the smallest possible jobs, sit down and write down all the things that make up your organization. It is a large number of things that your organization does. It's one of the big challenges with Tidy, is that small community organizations are effectively small businesses without the resourcing, without the paid people. So it makes it really, really hard because it's such a large number of things. But breaking down all of the operations into the smallest possible jobs, like I said, emptying the bins or picking up t-shirts is the smallest possible job. And what are all the other smallest possible jobs that you can write down? Ensuring then that all of these jobs are visible to all of the administrators so we can farm them out to as many people as possible, and trying to groom people into these organizational structures and build them up into the larger roles. Because that sort of thing will build the culture, and it will mean people aren't spending 11 hours a week in each of these jobs. Recurring jobs are assigned to roles. Succession plans, really powerful feature of Tidy, meaning that it's easy to pull people into the secretary's job or treasurer's job, etc., so they can pick up where previous people have come from. Grouping those jobs into functions and not departments, so create functional leaders, and you've got to trust your leaders. You're not the only leader if you're the president. Generally speaking, everyone's leadership material. It's just a matter of you sort of carving out the type of leadership that they can lean into to really make for a successful canteen or bar or events manager or whatever the case might be for your organization. Allocating jobs to members. So going back to it, if they aren't too willing, everyone's willing to some degree because they've joined your community, so they want to be part of something. But if they don't have enough time, or they don't feel that they're capable of doing it, give them something smaller and simpler. Just get them in the house so you can then build them into other roles. Not everyone's going to build into it. I've definitely had my blues with people that say, you know, just charge me another $20 a year and pay someone to empty the bins instead of asking me to do it. You'll always find those characters, to be sure. But, you know, trying to allocate jobs to members and groom them into bigger roles is definitely the path forward for all the organizations that we've seen over the last 10 years. And like I said, there's 10,000 plus of them. And the ones that are really, really successful do this really, really well. And celebrate the jobs completed regularly and publicly. Illustrate that you are all volunteers. One of the more successful things that I've seen that I've also been a part of is illustrating the true cost of running an organization and how many hours go into it, and celebrating your volunteers, taking them out for dinner, taking them to the pub and shouting them beers. We'll talk about advisory groups in a future webinar, but setting up an advisory group and including your volunteers in a dinner several times a year to celebrate these sorts of people is really, really important. Celebrating them away from the usual cut and thrust of running the organization and organizational activities is a really, really easy and powerful way to get volunteers on board and keep them around for a longer amount of time. Because like I said, 11 hours a week is not sustainable, and we see that time and time again. TidyHQ, we're obviously delivering on our mission to make administration simpler, run better now and for future generations. That's our mission. You'll see some really great improvements over the next 12 months, especially around tasks and the way that jobs can be allocated out and grouped together, to make this a more successful path for your organization. Because we think, you genuinely need a team around you to go far. I see Alan, big Al Connolly, thank you for that African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It's very, very apt for non-profit community organizations, to be sure.